Hey everyone, my name is Faith Harper, and this is my husband.
Joe Green.
We are presenting our super fancy first time ever model invitational recovery for to share with y'all today.
And she's a doctor.
And he's a recovery coach, which is far more interesting and far more relevant to what we're doing. So, what's this about? So, I'm actually a therapist, so I'm the one with the license, which is less important actually here. But I was trained in invitational education. I had a professor who was an invitational education guru person. I loved him, loved his classes. He was the guy that yelled at me to apply for the doctoral program. He was the one that would actually message me on Facebook, reminding me to take my GREs. Was the guy, like, professors don't do this, but he was the one that, really was the one that's like, hey, you need to do this. He's probably going to regret all of this now because everything that I publish has F-bombs in it. And that's probably doesn't reflect very well on the department. Um, so Joe was, he and I both had a lot of frustrations with a lot of the theoretical approaches to treating substance use and recovery. So the gold standard obviously is motivational interviewing, which doesn't really work well for everybody. And so why is that, and how can we address it with some of the things that he and I have talked about a lot over the years. So motivation is the essential ingredient to the change process. A strong collaborative relationship, Carl Rogers style, is an important start, but it really isn't enough to produce change. Motivational interviewing adds a directive component, using concepts from cognitive dissonance theory and self-perception theory. The treatment provider, whether it be a coach or a therapist, has a specific goal of reducing client ambivalence in order to increase motivation to change a target behavior. That's the theory behind it. That's the theoretical basis of motivational interviewing. That is, the intervention of the treatment provider, whether a coach or a therapist, hinges on therapeutic manipulation. Essentially, we're guiding a process, whether you're a coach or a therapist. Anything you want to add to that, Joe?
Yeah, we're tricking people into recovery, which is a strange thing. And the manipulative part of it is what sometimes doesn't work and what we don't like a lot of the times in our normal practice. Um, it's a strange thing where, like, Faith has to develop a relationship therapeutically with people. And I do too, but since I'm on the street, as it were, um, you're, you're trying to develop rapport with another human being with this thing in the background in your head that how am I going to get enough information to sort of guide this person to the prize that I want them to do. It feels very mechanical at times and not human.
And I should back up that I've never been a recovery coach. I don't have the lived experience of being in recovery myself, though I have been I was on a sort of community treatment team, which is what Joe is on now, and was on one for 5 years while I was in graduate school, and have the same being working in the field and being doing home-based work for many years, so have not just been in fancy private practice, but I don't have the same lived experience that a lot of y'all have, but have done the same level of field work that a lot of y'all are doing. So I don't have the lived experience y'all have, so I don't have that same experience, but I know what it's like to be in those, be working in people's homes or working in shelters and those kinds of things, and seeing how people are really living and feeling like I'm trying to manipulate them into doing something, and that feels really gross and uncomfortable. And that's the essentials of what motivational interviewing is. And I'm not saying that motivational interviewing, I mean, obviously that's our gold standard and can work very well, but sometimes people look at you and they're like, what are you doing? Like, you're basically, you're trying to, tell me to do something, and I'm seeing through this. And even for people who do it very, very well, our clients are dumb. Um, and a lot of times they see through what we're saying and asking them to do, and they're not buying it. And so, what are our options here when this is when they're seeing through this? And how else can we approach clients when we're stuck um, with yeah.
I used to be a private investigator, and I used to have to do a different kind of motivational interviewing, um, trying to figure out if somebody like stole something or if they committed a particular crime. And this feels very similar at times and kind of strange, um, because even though I have a completely different focus and approach, it does feel invasive in the same way sometimes. Not always, but um, artificial, I guess is maybe the word I'm looking for. And it's an enemy if you're actually trying to build a relationship with the person that isn't completely clinical in that way. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right.
Yeah, I'm trying to, as I'm somebody who, writes with F-bombs, and I'm, trying to do a presentation here where I'm not using any of them. But y'all know what I'm trying to say. So, so the ingredients to change in motivational interviewing is knowledge times motivation divided by resistances equals change. This is the essential formula in motivational interviewing. So what do you do with people for this if this doesn't work? And so this is what we were trying to come up with a resolution for. And this is what, when we were looking at options for, I kept coming back to this professor who I really liked, and what he used, and this is what I kept coming back to. So why might this be problematic? So obviously the vast majority of the individuals we serve have significant trauma histories. And being caught up in the justice system is disempowering in and of itself, and can serve and does serve as a trauma in and of itself, especially if their treatment is legally mandated. And so all therapeutic relationships should first and foremost be cognizant of that any interactions can serve to re-traumatize the individuals, right? So basically what we're saying is anything that's therapeutically manipulative, and motivational interviewing is does have a manipulative component, and a client who is intelligent is going to realize that can be problematic. That manipulative component to motivational interviewing can serve to re-traumatize individuals. And so we need to realize that that sort of that manipulative, I'm trying to convince you to do something, can serve to re-traumatize. That becomes that systems trauma component that we need to be cognizant of, that can feel like a re-traumatization. And so how do we recognize that becomes another form of systems trauma, and how do we also resolve that as part of the process? Do you want to add anything to
Yeah, I
that?
mean, it's like I don't want to be part of the institutional problems that have been a problem for this person their entire life, because so many folks that we meet, and I didn't know this before I got into this thing. Being married to the intimacy doctor means that I had a whole new impression of trauma on people's lives, and then doing this kind of work, you realize that 99% of the people that I work with have like something that happened to them in early childhood. They were born in severe poverty. They were born into abusive households. Then maybe they got into the Kit Kat. They got into they got into the prison at some point because of some desperation, or they fell in with the wrong people or whatever. Um, and so now we are representatives of a different institution, and we're using methods that are similar, hopefully in a good way. And that's the part of it that's a little bit tricky. And I think Faith is saying the same thing, that we're not discounting motivational interviewing. I use it constantly, and so does she. But um, trying to figure out what the line is so that we are not part of the institutions that we're trying to fight against.
So, and then how do we do that, and where do we have to dump out MI and use something else entirely for people who are like, yeah, no, stop with that. And where do we see that like this isn't working, and what is another option when motivational interviewing obviously isn't working, and we're getting that glassy-eyed stare. I mean, obviously motivational interviewing has a lot of research behind it. We're not saying, screw Miller and Wilnick, they're wrong. So here's the thing, and I use this all the time. This is one of those, Dr. Faith things that clients hear from me, is that people don't resist change, they resist being changed. And this is when people get clunky with motivational interviewing, this is what they're doing, is it's that sort of therapeutic manipulation component of motivational interviewing, is that being changed thing that happens when we get clunky with motivational interviewing, is that they realize that we're trying to change them. And we change all the time. It's that being change, that clunkiness of it. The change needs to be that, oh, this makes sense for me, versus somebody's trying to make us do something, versus it coming from an inside place where it makes sense for us. So how do we do that? How do we help people find that place that change makes sense for them versus we're trying to change them? So invitational theory. Invitational theory, and generally speaking, and invitational theory has been around for some time. Invitation is an intentional act designed to offer something beneficial for consideration. We're not trying to impart a process. We're not trying to change someone. Implicit in the definition is inviting is an ethical process involving continuous interactions between two people. And this is coming from the Perky and Novak article on invitational theory. And this comes from how invitational theory is used in education, and then how can we carry that into invitational recovery being used therapeutically in the counseling process and in the recovery process. So it's just something that we're offering. This might be of benefit to you. This is just something for consideration. So how can we bring this theory into recovery focused language, not just within the educational system? So invitational theory is a big thing. It's got foundations, it's got elements, it's got domains, it's got levels, it's got dimensions, and we're not going into all that because we don't need all that here. It's a lot. Academics like to make things complicated, and it doesn't need to be that complicated, and there's not going to be a test on that, and we only have an hour. And originally, obviously, we're supposed to be having this conversation in a big group discussion, and originally we were worried that everyone was going to sneak out a door, and you don't have to sneak out a door, and you also don't have to exit this because this is now online, and we're not going to go into all of this. So if we're going to shift in from motivational to invitational, the big thing that we need to do is the 5 elements, which are care, trust, respect, optimism, and intersectionality. So if you're going to try and ground yourself into invitational and try and use invitational theory and use that instead of more motivational interviewing, the 5 elements of care, trust, respect, optimism, and intersectionality are what it's going to be most helpful to you. So if you get really interested in the dialogue, you can look up the rest of it, and that's really cool. And if you want to study that and you are into academia, it's cool stuff. But these 5 are really all you need. Okay. So moving from theory into practice is going to be these 5. So care. That's the core inviting stance. Care means being a beneficial presence in someone else's life because you actually care about them. Warmth, empathy, positive regard all stem from honestly caring about another person. Ashley Montagu, the anthropologist Ashley Montagu, stated The core human behavioral need is love, and we are incapable of loving others until we have all been loved. If you don't care about people, why are you here? Um, and this is, we've all worked with people who are burned out, who don't care about the individuals they serve. And if you aren't in this for the right reasons, then it's time to not be here anymore, or to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. The book Trauma Stewardship is fantastic in this regard. We talk about self-care, and that's kind of one of those dumb buzzwords, like, face masks and yoga and all that, and it's really deeper than that. You can't care for clients if you're not caring for yourself, and you really have to care for people in this deep way, or it doesn't matter. Joe, what do you want to add to that? Like, this is real.
No.
This is really important, and this isn't buzzword stuff.
Yeah, I mean it's I don't see how you could even do the job if you are not able to connect at a human level. And like for everything else that we do, nothing works unless you have that. So until you're able to make that kind of link with somebody else, you're not going to be very effective at your job, whether you're using motivational interviewing or trying this invitational thing that we're talking about right now. And you have to also be able to, when you're caring, to move the focus off of yourself and of your clinician brain and onto the person and what they need and what is the most effective way to speak to them. There's this thing from Malcolm X that I like where he said we need to speak right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand. You are going to have people that are very, very bright, that have tremendous survival skills. They're antisocial survival skills, but they have them. And then you'll have other people who are, gangbangers, people who are single mothers, whatever it is, and you have to be able to approach them at the level that they need you to approach them. And that requires being a human, and that requires caring about other human beings. People, for me, are irritating in general, but the specifics I tend to love.
Yeah, and just it's interesting right now, like, we're recording this in the middle of a quarantine, and I've already done distance counseling for a few years, and I mean, especially my teen clients are sort of delighted to do video counseling because they're getting to show me their rooms and their pets and all this stuff. And so I'm getting to see my clients that, I mean, they miss coming to the office. They love my office and my toys and stuff, but they're also able to show me, and I'm showing them my house and my pets and my rooms and that kind of stuff, even though it's not fantastic, is another element of each other's lives that's pretty cool. So we're making the best of it. And these different elements of care are super important. I had one of my interns, she works at a local hospital that doesn't have the best reputation, and she's used to, me as her supervisor and the rest of my interns, and is sort of horrified by the way her colleagues are talking about, the clients that they serve, and the way that they're talked about. Um, and I'm so glad that she's horrified, when they're talking about, my borderline, or, those kinds of things. And I'm glad that she's horrified by that. And if you catch yourself thinking about people in those terms, you should be horrified, and you need to, we need to be doing the work around that. You should care about your people. And if you notice yourself, being upset by someone or exhausted by someone, what's going on with that? What's activating you with that? If you notice that someone's exhausting you, what's exhausting? How can you go deeper with that? We need to connect to people's humanity, and find our way in, I guess. That's the core inviting stance is our opportunity to find our way in with people. Of course, people are exhausting. Joe and I are exhausting, and we're in each other's space 24/7, and I'm sure we're exhausting each other on an ongoing basis right now. So a lot of our clients haven't had a whole lot of real love, and this is their chance to experience that, and that's their chance then to extend that out. I think that Ashley Montague was dead on when he says that you can't love if you've never been loved, and relational cultural theory has borne that out, as this is their chance to have a real relationship modeled so they can then go extend that out and have good relationships with other people. And we're inviting them into a solid relationship so they can then go have solid relationships with others. And that's really, really important. Until they've been invited into one, they're never going to be able to do that with other people. So you saw in the previous slide that care was that center core relationship. So that is that core invitational stance. So let's go look at some of the others there. Trust. Humans are healthiest when we're interdependent. And so we know that with relational cultural theory, that's something we've talked about since the 70s, and now brain science is bearing that out, is that human beings are meant to be interdependent. So our existence is dependent on cooperative activity. Brains are wired to be interdependent. So our interactions demonstrate that as much as the end product. So we're relationally grounded, so we become relationally grounded. We know that others are doing the best they can. We're not setting out to intentionally hurt others, and we value those relationships. So we're healthiest when we can connect and trust. So we know that we need to be able to trust others. So, that's something that I do with clients is I'm going to tell you the truth, and I want you to know that I'm going to do that. I'm not going to do sneaky and sketch shit behind your back. I work with teens. I'm going to tell you if I need to tell mom and dad something. If I'm, working with couples and I may be seeing one of the partners solo, I'm not going to tell the other partner something without telling you first. Or if we need to talk to your other partner, we need to talk to a parent, we're going to talk about it together first, kind of stuff. Or if you ask me not to say something and that's something that, that we can keep private, we'll discuss that. Like, I don't do sneaky and sketch shit. If I need to put you in the hospital, we're going to talk about it. Like, they know that they can trust me. Or if I say, yeah, you know what, I think you're going to need to go inpatient, we have those conversations. And if they tell me, yeah, I've been hurting myself, I say, I really appreciate you tell me. And you know that you're going to have to go inpatient, and I appreciate you trust me enough to know that I'm going to put you in the hospital, but you trust me enough that I'm going to keep you safe, and we're going to do that. And that stuff's important. And and that we've built that relationship, that even if they know that I don't really want to go to the hospital, but I also tell them, like, the part of you that wants to stay alive told me that, knowing that even though you're going to go to the hospital today. You want to speak on that as well with your clients? Because you have to do the same thing quite often.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be able to get to a point where you recognize um, where they're at, including those situations in which they're not sure if they want to go to the hospital, but you have an awareness of them. You've gotten to the point, and you have earned their trust and can communicate that. I just had a client last week who told me, "Hey, I relapsed, and it wasn't even a relapse. It was this person snorted when you cook heroin, there's some stuff left over at the bottom of the pan, and that's what they snorted. And she wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't built up a sufficient enough relationship with this person that they felt they could trust me with that information. Because it's somebody that's also in the court system. Like, it's a big deal. And so, I praised her for it. I mean, it's fantastic. I'm so glad that you felt comfortable enough that you could tell me this thing that you did. And there's like tremendous amounts of shame with that. I mean, she just feels terrible. It's like I'm at the bottom of the ocean, and I was able to process that information with her, and ultimately we decided, what's our plan going to be going here out. We're going to tell your PO, we're going to, do whatever we had to do. And that is not possible without that trust. And that part about the intentionally hurting others part, I mean, most of our clients are not sociopathic. I mean, every now and then we have one, but by and large, these are people who would love to be regular, cooperative human beings, but they've had so much terrible stuff
Mhm.
happen to them in their lives that they've developed all these maladaptive
Mhm.
strategies for working those things through. And trust is something that I struggle with personally. I mean, I know why that I do struggle with trust. It's because of how I grew up. There was, the family relationships. I learned not to count on other people. And so this is something that's a personal struggle for me as well. And I have to work on that, and I do.
And when they learn to trust you too, I had a client tell me a couple of weeks ago, I'm suicidal, but and he said, I'm casually suicidal.
Yeah,
And I'm like, well, as long as your suicidality is not wearing a tux, we cool. You don't need to go impatient. And
yeah,
we can even kind of joke about it, that we trust and know each other well enough to know, like, so what's your plan? I promise to tell you if it gets worse. And, we came up with a good plan to be safe. And they also trust me well enough to know, like, I'm going to tell you how bad it gets. And they trust me well enough to know, I'm not just going to freak out and put them in the hospital just because, they can tell me about what's going on and know that I'm not going to, immediately freak out and hospitalize them just because the thoughts are there and something. So we can also have a dialogue about what's going on and not freak out and have space to have difficult conversations. And that's something else. We need to be able to have space to have difficult conversations
yeah.
and hard conversations too. So and have value in the relationship. And also, and I tell people too, like, especially when it's a new relationship, if you don't know me well enough to talk about complicated and difficult things, that makes sense. If you have only known me for 5 minutes, it's okay if you don't want to talk about this stuff. That's okay. You want to know who I am. And it would be weird if you've only known me for 20 minutes to go into a lot of depth about stuff. That makes sense. Yeah, that's okay. Okay, so the third is respect. If everyone has value, that means they're inherently worthy of respect and they're able to make decisions for their own lives. So respect ties into the relational theory. Again, like, I'm RCT trained, so I go into RCT a lot. The relational theory idea of mutuality. Power is shared, not wielded. So invitational theory a lot ties into relational cultural theory. So power is shared, not wielded. So we have shared power in these relationships. So we have mutual respect. I'm not trying to wield power over you. So, automatically in these situations, understand that we do automatically have a level of power. Obviously, we're writing notes where we may be testifying in court. We have notes that may be going to a PO or something like that. Understand that. But we're not trying to wield, well, I'm going to have to tell your PO this. Um, but we can share this power. So let's talk about this. Understanding that, yeah, so knowing that your PO is going to be seeing this, let's talk about what's going to happen here. um, Talking about talking about that stuff in a really honest kind of way. I'm not I'm not trying to screw you over here. You just mentioned that case, knowing that all of this stuff, that are you gonna be drug testing? Are you gonna pop pot? Knowing that I'm gonna go have to, your PO is probably gonna ask me what's going on here, and that is shared power here, like being really honest about that situation. That's how we can share power in those kinds of situations where there is obviously a difference there. Do you want to kind of talk more about that? And then there's
Yeah, I mean, and it's probably easier for me at some level because I have a natural disaffinity for top-down systems. and
I mean, me too.
I'm basically an anarchist. So a lot of the like I share their distrust of cops and institutions. So when we're having those conversations, I will lead with that very frequently with some of our folks. Look, I'm not a cop. I'm not interested in punishment. I'm not interested in judgment. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get you to a point where, if the goal is recovery, to get you to a point where you are in recovery, you are no longer using. Um, so it's very much a what are my interests in this person, and what I try to do is set up a situation where my interests are their interests to a large extent. I mean, we can't adopt the maladaptive strategies that the person is going. I can't help them score, as frequently get this question, but we can work together towards this shared goal, and hopefully we have a shared goal at that point. But to come at it from this looking down the cross at these folks is just it's not going to work. It's a disaster. You have to be able to enter into a relationship where their word means at least as much as yours does, and hopefully more.
Well, and I mean, you are contracted with the court system
Sure.
too, so I mean, y'all's documentation and stuff can be, I mean, theoretically, mine can be as well, though I am known for, I mean, I get sent clients from the VA and stuff because I am a private pay therapist, and um, I don't. Um, I don't take insurance, and so my stuff is not in the system. And I mean, theoretically, it could be, but I mean, I'm known for being a pain who doesn't want my documentation going into the system. So, I mean, theoretically, I mean, y'all stuff can go in the court. I mean, anyone's can. So, I mean, anybody's stuff could be brought in, but um, welcome to the U.S. Intentionality. Intentionality means we represent or stand for something of value and are conveying this message to other. Intentionality is actually it's a late 19th century term coined by the philosopher Franz Brentano. It allows us to create, maintain, and enhance environments that demonstrate care, optimism, trust, and respect. Remember, invitations are intentional acts offering something for consideration. So, it just means that there is intention behind what we're doing. So our invitations have intent behind them. We're just what we're doing is not we're just not out there willy-nilly. Like you said, like I can't offer to help you score. You talk about recovery being a process. Um, I recovery for me. I use the definite. It's a reawakening of hopes and dreams, of having a life of meaning.
Yeah.
What were the things that were important to you as a kid? What were the things that gave you joy and meaning as a kid, and that for me would be like that offering of consideration, like what would be like I can't help you score, but did you want to be an artist as a kid? Did you want to be a musician? That to me is an invitation to a life worth living again. That would be an intentional invitation to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Trying to figure out what it is that they want, and to have them supply their own meanings. I think this is why I sort of bristle at AA stuff. And if somebody wants to use AA, I'll help them. Um, but the approach is what I bristle at, because, and I understand why they do it. They're supplying this larger meaning, but it's especially for um, some of our clients, giving them the opportunity to supply their own meaning, I think down the line will help them stay in recovery. rather than submitting to an outside force. That's always going to be less effective than if you are chasing your own dreams. I was trying to think of what Joseph Campbell's phrase was. Is it finding your passion? It's not quite right, but anyway.
Well, out here, we have Dharma Recovery.
Yeah.
Um, we have the Buddhist 12 steps. So it is, the AA 12-step model, but it's Buddhist. Then we have the Dharma Recovery as well. And then we have for people who like the AA 12 steps, there is a wide variety. Some of them are more traditional. There are some people who use it, but the greater AA community is the higher power. I actually have one of my interns. God is getting off drugs is is what God stands for. God, getting off drugs is what she uses for herself. She's been sober for some time, so I like that model. So San Antonio is big enough that there is a wide variety there. So there's a lot of people who use a lot of different things. So we don't really have like Save Ourselves or as much out here as they probably do in Portland, unfortunately. Okay, so that's cute, nice buzzwords, but what does that actually look like? Good questions, our imaginary audience. Okay, motivational interviewing. So here's some examples. So client, I don't want to give up drinking. I like to be able to party with my friends and my cousins and everyone drinks. So kind of the traditional motivational interviewing response is you don't want to give up drinking and partying with people you care about, and at the same time, you want to get off paper and the judge says you have to get sober. Client says, yeah. Traditional motivational interviewing responses, I'm wondering on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 not being at all ready to even consider not drinking and 10 being walking out this door and not drinking again, where are you right now? Client, okay, so this is what we're doing. I don't know, a 3. Motivational response, hey, cool, partway there. What would it take to get you to a 4? That's a very kind of traditional scaling type of motivational interviewing way of doing it. And it uses the ands, that's a very kind of traditional Milner and Rolnick motivational interviewing way of handling that. Invitational recovery would do something like, I don't want to give up drinking. I like being able to party with my friends and my cousins and everyone drinks. Invitational recovery would do like, yeah, you're right, it sucks. All these other people are out there partying without repercussions, and here you are being forced into a decision you don't want to have to make. Client would be like, yeah, right? Innovational recovery and be like, I'd like to hear more about your friends and your cousins if you feel like sharing. Client, my cousin Jerry, he's always had my back. I was getting bullied in 5th grade because we were poor, and he beat the shit out of anyone that tried to bully me. Invitational recovery response. So he's 100% a person for life. Giving up hanging out with him is not doable. How do you feel about looking at options that don't involve giving up people that are important to you? Yeah. I've had very similar conversations. I'm sure you have too.
Yeah.
I've had conversations with clients that lived in really small towns where that was really important, and we discuss, hey, so if you're out with friends like that, can you carry around a beer and not drink it, or would that be too tempting? Could you carry around a soda and lime and, told people you had a vodka? So you can hang out with your boys, and if you had if you had a soda and lime and, so it looks like you're drinking, so you don't look like a pussy ass bitch, kind of thing. It's like, yeah, I could do that. Nobody will say nothing as long as I don't look like a pussy, and I can hang out at the pool with my boys or whatever, and, then they were good. Yeah. I can take a kratom and then I'll be chill because my anxiety's bad or whatever. We came up with plans and it worked. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I agree, and I'm all about harm reduction. If we can get 3 binge drinking nights down to 2, if we can get somebody to smoke weed instead of shooting up, everything's a process. So I am perfectly willing to meet my clients where they are and do this sort of invitational recovery where we try to figure out what's the best way to get them to where we want them to go, even if that means we're doing 2 inches at a time. You know, rather than trying to make them or figure out how to trick them into doing what they want, because it feels very it can feel very rat in a cage kind of, or rat in a maze rather, um, when you're doing it that way. Whereas this feels more human. Um, what tell me what the circumstances are that I can use to try and meet you where you're at.
And it is very, traditional model of, new spaces, new faces. And this right here
Yeah.
is saying, "No, you didn't understand. This person saved my life. I grew up, wearing shoes with no soles. And my cousin beat the crap out of anyone who messed with me. And I'm not going to dump him out of my life because he drinks." And the judge says, I can't be around him if I went off paper. I'm not going to do that. He's my boy, and he's my cousin, and he's my family, and he's my protector, and I'm not going to do that. You've just discounted something that's really important. You just said you have to get away from your family, and that's not appropriate.
Yeah, I think this is like, it's also a recognition that almost everything in this life is more complicated than can be solved with, a particular rule or a particular stance. Um, we're always doing this kind of push-pull and figuring out the best way to maneuver in these tight corners and these roads that go on, in various directions. And it's more flexible in that way. We're working with what we have to a much greater degree, I feel like, while also maintaining respect for the person that we're working with.
And even with something like that, it may be where you're like, "Hey, like I've taken up boxing," and you tell your cousin Jerry, like, "I'm doing Whole30, man, so I can't drink this month." Like, I've done stuff like that. Like, "Oh man, that's tight. All right, that's cool." Like like there's all kinds of ways of doing that. And having to figure out the way that that works for him so he doesn't give up his cousin Jerry.
Yeah.
Um, so you're not scaling. Like, how do we get you from a 3 to a 4 or whatever? That you got to get creative with. So that's kind of one of those fundamental between motivational interviewing will never get you there with Jerry, and invitational recovery lets you look at the relationship and why that relationship is sacred and gives you more creativity so you can see why Jerry is going to be part of his life forever, and so you get to be more creative with that relationship and problem solve it in a different way.
Even if you don't like Jerry, which
Yeah.
is very possible.
Yeah.
Right? Jerry may be the biggest drug dealer in the state, you know what I mean? But that's his guy.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have to figure out how that relationship's going to work and him being in recovery at the same time.
Yeah.
And I have exactly that problem with one of my clients.
Yeah. Yeah. The family member is one of the biggest dealers in town, but he's going to be a part of the client's
life forever.
Yeah.
Regardless.
And you're like, "Will you stop trying to troll?" Yes. Yeah. Okay, so invitational recovery stances. The provider is not the decider. Yes. We are there to support the process, not guide it. We can provide the benefit of additional resources and viewpoints. Hey, can you carry a drink and not drink it? Can you make it look like vodka, but it's soda? Can you convince them? Sorry, we got 2 cats that are helping us today, so there you go. We are we are in quarantine with 4 cats because we have too many cats. We actually know we have 3 cats and we have 1 bonus cat. We can provide the benefit of additional resources and viewpoints. I can be super creative. Hey, you are cleaning up, so you are doing Whole30, so you can't drink this month. And people are like, "Oh, that's really cool, man. That's awesome." We can demonstrate that we value someone who has felt valueless within this system. Somebody who has never been loved before, we're the ones that are providing care and love and showing them that they can be loved, therefore they can love themselves and love somebody else.
And if I could just add something real quick, I think that's very important, and I think that also hits upon one of the things about motivational interviewing that's sometimes a problem, is that what I want to show is that we value the person and it's not an exchange. Okay, so throughout this person's whole life, and frankly throughout all of our lives to some extent, um, being treated as a value involves an exchange: sex, money, drugs, whatever. And so I don't want to replace that with a relationship in which I value you if I can get you to do my process, if I can get you to come along with me, even if I have your best interest at heart. So I value you, period. And then everything else can flow from there. But that first step has to be there. That I value this person, and it's not an exchange of resources, if that makes sense.
My clients know that I like them because they're funny and smart, and I like them because they were a pain in my ass. Like,
Yeah.
they know that I like them because they're good and interesting human beings.
Yeah.
And they know that. Even when they're being a pain in my ass, they know that I like them. Yeah. And I tell them all things like that all the time. Like, if you weren't my client, we would totally hang out and be friends. Um, and that's super important. And we enjoy each other's company, and that makes people, I mean, and it's true, and that's not, and that's not something that I put on, and that I'm excited to see them, and that, makes we enjoy each other's company, and that makes us both work harder in the relationship. And that's part of relational cultural theory too, is the mutuality in the relationship makes us both transformed by it. I mean, I'm using the theory words of what Joe just said.
Yeah.
So we engage in a Socratic dialogue that lets us to explore options and alternatives, and we model a relational mutuality. So invitational approaches. So help me understand. So like, tell me about Jerry. Help me understand this relationship. I wonder if, does it make sense if, would it be helpful? So would it be helpful if? So also, we're not getting into a power struggle. If I go like, I wonder if, because then we go like, what about, and then you're getting into no, 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 no. Well, that won't. No. I mean, we've all done that, like early on in our careers, where somebody just negs everything, and then you're like, well, I don't fucking know then. So if you're like, would it make sense if, and they're like, oh, well, yeah, maybe. Would it be helpful if? So maybe some other possibilities. My opening is, well, so what do we need to work on today? Right now, in the middle of quarantine, like, so everybody's got so much going on. What would be most helpful today? Everything's a shit show right now. What would be most helpful today? I don't do, even on a normal day when we actually get to like go to my office and people wear normal pants, not pajamas, is what do we need to work on today? Like, I set a stage that this is a working thing, not just like, so how's it going today? Or, I set the stage that, this is a working relationship, we come in and we work hard. What makes sense for you? I say over and over, like, I'm not the decider, unlike George W. Bush, for those of you who are old enough to remember, like, I'm not the decider, you're the decider. I know I can give you options. I can even give you, like, look, if this for me, this is what would make sense for me, but I'm not me. This is not me. I'm here to support you making the decision you need to make for your own life. But you're the one living this. Anything else that you would add to that? What kind of stuff do you use?
No, I use this exact stuff, and it's to the point of, again, finding out what would be of interest to them rather than taking in my agenda in my head. And it probably helps that, frankly, I'm not a clinician. So when I'm dealing with other people, I don't have a particular approach or model in mind other than a person-centered recovery model. So these questions are very natural. So,
well, I am a clinician. These are the questions
yeah,
that I use.
yeah. But you know what I mean. But I don't have that initial first step of this is the program and faith just doesn't do programs. So I mean, but I see this, I guess, in a lot of my colleagues, where when they meet people, they have like an internal list of their clinician stuff that they're trying to get through, and it's helpful if you can unlearn that for a minute, especially when you're first meeting somebody and just figuring out what makes sense for them. And these are the types of questions. Yeah, would it be helpful if? Does it make more sense? So tell me about tell me about your auntie. Like what, your auntie that always helps you and gives you money, and like, what's going on there? All those kind of the normal questions you would ask another person if you were just getting to know them. Now you end up turning their answers into information, and then you try to make a plan from there. But this to me makes perfect sense, and it doesn't have that manipulative part to it.
Well, I mean, I am a clinician, but I'm an RCT clinician. So this is, but this is, I mean, even in community mental health, that was, when I ran groups in partial hospitalization program, and that was kind of the running joke. Anytime somebody new was brought into my group, somebody else in the group would jump up and say, "Welcome to Faith's room, and here we work. If you don't want to work, you should go find another room." So what do we need to work on today is always, and even my poor teens, bless their heart, they come in with a list. They come in, ready to work. What do we need to work on today? So you're invited into this process, and this is a process that that you're invited into this. And I hear, like, I'm in the back. I have a map book if we need it, but you're the one driving this car. And you can trust me. Like, I'm going to have the right map. I don't have a map to Bulgaria. I have the right map, and you can trust me to read it to the best of my ability and stuff. And own the process if I get something wrong. But I'm not going to try and manipulate you into doing things incorrectly, and I don't have some kind of ulterior motives in the background. And I think we
Yeah,
covered kind of what we were wanting to cover. That motivational interviewing is saying, like, this is you can see that this has some of tying and of helping people get to some good place, but there's not a lot of subterfuge
right.
attached to it. It's everything is above board, and so it's all out on the table of what we're trying to do with individuals. Um, oh yeah, so just this kind of using Robert Ashford's multiple paths of recovery, which you kind of mentioned earlier, like harm reduction and stuff. There's multiple paths of recovery using one of his graphics. As recovery is the expectation, not the exception. There's 12-step mutual aid. There's multiple paths to that. His Unity Recovery page on Facebook has a lot of really cool stuff, and he does a lot of research in that area.